All right, so Tom is asking, in John 3:13, Jesus says, "No one has ever gone into heaven except the one who came from heaven, the Son of Man." Where then have believers gone who died, both before Christ and subsequent to Christ?
So I mentioned earlier that there's a time where I actually like how the New Living Translation words things, and this is that situation. So first, let's see what the NKJV says, and then we'll compare that to the New Living Translation. So NKJV says, "No one has ascended to heaven but he who came down from heaven, that is the Son of Man who is in heaven." And just by way, this verse contains very complex Greek, and some people think it has an idiom in there, which idioms make translation very difficult because it means that at that time and the people around there, they had a way of saying things that they all understood what it means, but if you take it literally, it wouldn't actually convey the full meaning. So there is meaning that is lost in translation, and we might have to look at this, look at greater context, and read into it things that might not be there just in the plain words. So now I'm going to share the NLT, and the NLT actually has that extra meaning in it that makes it make more sense. It's more clear what Jesus is meaning here. So John 3:13 NLT version, it says, "No one has ever gone to heaven and returned, but the Son of Man has come down from heaven." And what's the context here? This is Jesus speaking with Nicodemus. And in fact, in just the verse before this, Jesus said, "If I have told you earthly things and you don't believe me, how will you believe me if I tell you of heavenly things?" And then he goes on to say, "No one has ever gone to heaven and come back, but I am the one who's descended from heaven." So he's saying, I have come from heaven. I'm a firsthand witness. I can tell you about these things, believe it or not. That's his point. Now, Jesus is not making a statement about the state of the dead and where people go. He's talking specifically about who's gone to heaven and seen heaven and then come to earth to report on it. That's the context here of what he's saying. As much as I would love to use this verse as proof that the dead don't go straight up to heaven, this is not that verse for it. So I don't want to misuse verses and take them further than they should be taken. But that said, let's talk, Tom, about what does happen when people die, and there are a lot of people who believe that what happened in the Old Testament times is actually different than what happens modernly today when in after the cross when people die. And we're going to see the Bible actually is pretty consistent, shares the same thing again and again and again on what happens when people die, where they go, and what what happens in the different dispensations, as some people want to call it. Now, we know of actually three human beings who have been taken, and that's actually a key word, taken up into heaven even before Jesus's time. And this is why it's important to make sure we properly understand what Jesus has said. And Jesus wasn't making a contradictory statement. He wasn't saying no humans have ever gone up into heaven either. So these three people who have gone into heaven are that we know for sure, and there could be others, but it's Enoch, Elijah, and Moses. Now let's quickly look at Enoch. We see his story in Genesis chapter 5, and in verse 24, we're told Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. In other words, the implication here is that nobody could find Enoch, and there was no physical body left on the planet Earth for people to find. So God took Enoch, body and all, up to heaven, and nothing was left. And then keep in mind, because this is going to help answer the question of where dead people go. So remember this. And then let's look at Elijah now. We're going to 2 Kings chapter 2, starting at verse 11. It says, "Then it happened as they continued on and talked." So this is Elijah and Elisha, his helper, walking along. It says, "Then suddenly a chariot of fire appeared with horses and fire and separated the two of them. And Elijah went up up by a whirlwind into heaven. And Elisha saw it, and he cried out, my father, the chariot of Israel and its horsemen. So he saw him no more, and he took hold of his own clothes and tore them into two pieces. So no guessing here, right? Did God leave Elijah's body when he took Elijah up to heaven? The answer is clearly no. Elijah was taken up, body and all. Just his clothes, like his clothes came back down, and we're told that Elisha puts those on himself. Now, this was interesting. Moses, the story of Moses is a little bit different than the others because we know that Moses actually died. The other two, Enoch and Elijah, never died. They're taken straight up, body and all, into heaven. Moses died, but we also know that he was raised up again and taken to heaven because we see Moses alongside Elijah meeting with Jesus on the Mount of Transfiguration. Now, amazingly, the Bible does not tell us about the moment, or actually, sorry, it does. The Bible does tell us about the moment that Jesus, as Michael the archangel, went to resurrect Moses and take him up to heaven. We find this in the book of Jude. And who would you expect, by the way, if Jesus is showing up, going to resurrect the body, who would show up unhappy and try to stop this and say, hey, Moses is mine. He belongs to the realm of the dead. And if you're guessing Satan, you would be correct. And this is exactly the scene we see in Jude 1, verse 9. It says, yet Michael, the archangel, in contending with the devil when he disputed about the body of Moses, dared not bring against him a reviling accusation, but said, the Lord rebuke you. So this is that contentious scene. And Jesus goes down to resurrect Moses, and Satan's like, no, you can't do that. You can't do that. But why did Jesus go down to get the body? Why are they fighting over the body? Because if the only thing matters is the spirit floating up to heaven, wouldn't Jesus be good enough with that? Wouldn't God be happy? Like, okay, hey guys, the spirit of Moses has arrived, start the party. But no, the body mattered. And again, I'm not saying God can't ever recreate a body and all this, but there was meaning, symbolism there that we're going to talk about. Why did God want to have the body? So as we saw with Enoch and we saw with Elijah, God doesn't just take our spirit up to heaven. It's a whole separate video, which I've talked about several times. But when we're talking about like spirits in the Bible, it's often a mistranslation. I do believe there's a Holy Spirit, but when it comes to like humans having spirits, it's better to think of it in terms of a breath. God breathed the breath of life into humans, and is this continual dependence on God. Every breath we take, in a sense, is a reminder of our dependence on him. We don't have a spirit, but we have the breath of life in us. And when we die, that breath returns to God. And the Hebrew word for this is ruach. And then in the Greek, they use the word pneuma to talk about this life force, the spark of life that's wind-based. And when the ruach departs, when we no longer are breathing, our body decomposes back into the dust from which God took us from. This is straight from Genesis chapter 3, as God says, to dust you are, and to dust you came, and to dust you will return. And in fact, humans don't have souls. Rather, Genesis 2:7 makes clear that when you take the earth and physical matter and you infuse it with the breath of life, you get a living soul. The combination of them is what some people translate the soul. The body and all, the body, mind, all these things is the soul. So we don't have a soul. We are the soul. If you want to use the word soul, which I don't think is very productive because it comes attached with so much Greek philosophy and modern belief systems and pagan belief systems attached to it. Not when we think soul, we don't think what the Hebrews and the biblical writers would have thought. So when God takes somebody to heaven, notice again, the body is always going too. That's because, again, there's not a soul, a spirit that goes. There is a bodily form. Even angels have a bodily form. Jesus, when he ascended back into heaven, did he just go by spirit and a body fall back down? No, right? Body and all went up. So, what about Christian believers today? What happens when they die? Where do they go? We don't have to live in mystery. 1 Corinthians 15, starting at verse 50, the Apostle Paul speaking, he says, "Now this I say, brethren, that flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God, nor does corruption inherit incorruption." So, like, wait, Jay, you just said bodies are going up into heaven. Yes, I am saying that. But here he's talking about flesh and blood bodies, which is very different. So our current bodies are not what we would take to heaven. But remember, with the story of Elijah, even it was suggested there that there was a transformation in that moment where then he hitches the ride on the chariot, and then he doesn't need his old clothes even anymore. He now has a robe of light. Is the implication there? There's this transformation that goes on. We get a new body, which Paul talks about further on. He says, "Behold, I tell you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet. For the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised incorruptible, and we shall be changed. For this corruptible part, must put on incorruption, and this mortal must put on immortality." So when this corruption has put on incorruption, and this mortal has put on immortality, then shall be brought to pass the saying that is written, "Death is swallowed up in victory." So this verse is completely rebutting the notion that we have an immortal spirit that floats up into heaven. When does immortality get given out? It's when we get the new body. When do we get the new body? Well, for those who have died, it will be when they are resurrected. They're in the ground, they're decomposed. God is going to raise them up, and at that moment, they will have a new body. And those who are still alive will be changed and transformed alongside them. And when we further explore this, I read it, and you may miss it, but Paul talked about we shall not all sleep. What is he talking about, the sleep? So the sleep is referring to the dead. That's his way of referring to it. So we're not all going to be dead. We're going to be asleep. Now, this term sleep actually shows up in the Bible. I counted it myself at least nearly 50 times where death is being alluded to as a sleep. 50 times. And it's not saying it's exactly like sleep, but this idea that when you close your eyes, things go black, and then the next time you wake up, hours have gone by. That's kind of the idea that it's trying to convey. In fact, think of sleep as being like that deepest, darkest coma that we almost see in movies where someone has been out for years and they wake up and just realize that the world has completely changed while they were unconscious. That is sleep. That's how it works. So that's what sleep is like. And for some people, it will be centuries or millennia that will have passed when they, in a sense, open their eyes again. Death is just the absence of life. Think about that. Death is just the absence of life. It's nothing mysterious. It's not anybody going anywhere or doing anything. It's the utter absence. It's like your computer. If you went and you unplugged the electricity, unplug the cable on it, turn it off, unplug it, what happened? Did your computer die? Is it still conscious? Did some spirit from the computer end up going somewhere? Or is it just completely shut down, nothing happening? That's kind of the idea of what death really is. It's kind of like nothing at all. And so death is to life what darkness or shadow is to light. Again, think of that. So darkness, is it actually a thing? Can you actually make darkness? Is it a thing that exists in and separately of itself? Or does darkness only exist because it is the absence of light? So no light, you now have a shadow. That is what death is. It's the absence of life. And guess what? The Bible repeatedly describes life as light and death as darkness. And running a little short on time, but another great verse I highly suggest reading would be 1 Thessalonians 4:13-17. And this one is again where Paul is talking about those who have fallen asleep, that they will be resurrected, and how everybody would be brought up together with Christ on the day of resurrection. By the voice of Michael the archangel, no less, which actually is Jesus, because Jesus says he's the one who raises the dead with his voice. So it's the Bible's so consistent, whether it was in Old Testament times, New Testament times, Jesus himself, death has always functioned the same. And then the process of being resurrected is the same, at least for the righteous. And then it's with a body, but a new body that we will be taken up into heaven. And right now, the only people up there would be like Enoch, Elijah, Moses, and people that Jesus would have taken with him when he ascended up into heaven. We're not told who that is. But these saints and all these people that we're told might be up there in their spirits, and we're praying to them for help, and like Mary, they're not there. They're not. And this is where understanding what really happens when we die can have major implications, even for how our religion works and our relationship with God. We don't have our ancestors looking down on us. We don't have church leaders and these people looking down on us. And we don't pray to them. We can go straight to God and have a direct relationship with him, and just have the comfort of knowing that those who have died aren't experiencing anything. They're not in pain. They're not suffering. They aren't experiencing joy. They don't exist at the moment until that hour when God will raise them, whether it will be to the resurrection of life for those who are righteous, or to the resurrection of condemnation for those who have refused to enter into a life-saving relationship with God. So
They're also not seeing our suffering.
And that's right. They're not seeing our suffering either. So Tina, Wendy, anything you guys would like to add?
Yeah, I just to touch on really quick how the question saying, where are people who've died before Jesus and after Jesus? So I think you did a really good job in being very thorough. So just really quick, it is the same across the Old and New Testament as far as, death being asleep. And David himself says that in Psalms chapter 13, verse 3, he says, lest I sleep the sleep of death. And so, the Old Testament people understood it very clearly that death was like a sleep, just like you're saying, Jay. And, when Jesus was on earth, this is, right before he was crucified, Jesus says the same thing, in John chapter 11, when, Lazarus dies and he tells his disciples, Lazarus is sleeping, and they go, well, don't wake him up. Like he'll do well if he sleeps. But Jesus was very clear that he was not talking about his, rest, but but of his death. And then Jesus plainly had to tell them he is dead. Like, that's what I mean when I'm saying sleep. So Jesus used the term, which obviously we could trust anything Jesus says. And then just like, Jay, you're saying after Jesus, his disciples continue to use that term. And just like you're saying, 1 Thessalonians 4, it says, those who shall not all sleep, but some will be alive and remain. And so those who sleep in Christ will be resurrected. So yes, this idea of sleep, it's a state of unconsciousness. And also, again, just reiterating how biblical it is in the book of Ecclesiastes chapter 9, it says, the dead know not anything. They, all their love, all their hate is all gone. Like they don't know anything. It's a state of total unconsciousness. So again, there's so many other, so many verses. So it's so, clear from the Bible as to the state of death. And I think that's why the devil wants us to have so much confusion about it, because, it's, I think if we don't really understand what death is, Satan can use that to his advantage to try to trick us into believing, lies and having fears that we really should not have. And, and using things to deceive us. If we think, people, are, somehow still conscious after death, and they can contact us or we can contact them. And that's really not the case. And people who do try to contact things in the spiritual world are not talking to people who've died. They're talking to demons. And so we have to be very, very careful, because we don't want to have anything to do with Satan and his angels, because that's something that's you just don't want any part of it for your own sanity, for your own well-being, and for your salvation. So we want to only talk to God and be led by his Holy Spirit. So sorry, Wendy, did you have anything else on that?
I think it's interesting you mentioned David at the beginning, because it's actually one of the people that were outright told where he is right now.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
Acts
in Acts.
chapter 2, day of Pentecost, Peter is giving the famous sermon. He says in Acts 2:29, "Men and brethren, let me speak freely to you of the patriarch David, that he is both dead and buried, and his tomb is with us to this day." The implication is his body is here with us. He's still with us. He hasn't gone to heaven. And then we
Mhm.
scroll down, if you want further assurance that that David is not in heaven. Here's Peter, Acts 2, verse 34. "For David did not ascend into heaven." So we don't have to speculate here. The Bible is so consistent again and again
Mhm.
that the dead do not go into heaven unless God specifically translated them. And we're told only a couple specific instances, like the ones I mentioned, when that's been the case.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And that is such an important point. And I'm so grateful that, here at Bible Ask, we want to teach this and share this truth, because it is so important. And there is a great deception that the devil wants to put on this whole world. And we have to be very, very careful, because, Satan is a great deceiver. He's really, really good at lying. We want to make sure
Really good.
that we know, the Bible, and know it for what it's actually saying, because to the law and to the testimony, if they speak not according to this word, according to the Bible, as it says in Isaiah chapter 8 verse 20, if they speak not according to this word, it is because there's no light in them. So we have to make sure what we're saying is in accordance with God's holy word.